Let's go ahead and start off our panel number one. I want to welcome you all here. This is panel number one in the Leadership Conference. My name is Brad Johnson. I'm a professor in the Leadership Ethics and Law Department here at the Naval Academy. I was walking over here and it was so nice out. I was cringing, wondering whether I should tell you tomorrow morning it's going to be 5 when you wake up. And I'm apologizing in advance for that. Come back in May, please, and visit us again and when it's more hospitable. If you notice, the theme of this conference is followership, and I find that very refreshing. As I've chatted a bit with the distinguished panelists here, we're finding this idea very refreshing because year after year, we tend to focus on leaders for good reason at a leadership conference. We do that, however, at the peril of ignoring the fact that leadership is always a relationship, and we got to be awfully careful not to ignore the other variables and the other people involved in that leadership relationship. What I'd like to do is provide you with some questions for you to think about, ponder, mull over as you're hearing our distinguished speakers offer some introductory comments. Think about these questions. Ask yourselves, what do you think about them? How do you think your views match up with the panelists? And then, as always in these conferences and the panels, we're going to make sure that you've got ample time to interact with the panelists. So here are a few questions. What is a follower's role in influencing organizational change? Should we think of followers as change agents and innovators? And if we do that, do the roles of innovator and dissenter conflict with other follower roles? How do those go together? Can followers affect change from the lowest levels of an organization? Does that work? And if it works, how is that going to look? Here's an important question. Can a follower dissent constructively? That means while remaining loyal to the organization. How would that look? And a last question for you. How does a leader create a work environment if this dissent and creativity is a good thing among followers? How do I create a work environment that fosters and encourages that among my followers? So with those questions stewing and you giving that some consideration, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our distinguished panelists in turn. I want to point out that their full bio is in the program, so I'm just going to give you an abbreviated highlight version. I'll introduce each of them, let them make their opening remarks, and then as always, be making notes of questions you've got, and we're going to have some very rich exchange after the opening remarks. First of all, I want to introduce Dr. Barbara Kellerman. She is the James MacGregor Burns Lecturer.
Can you guess which one I am?
In case there was any doubt. At Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government. She was also the founding executive director of the Kennedy School's Center for Public Leadership. She has written a number of well-received books in leadership, including Bad Leadership, Followership, Women in Leadership, and in 2012, The End of Leadership. And I will share with you that when we saw The End of Leadership, everyone in my leadership department ran out to buy it. We were a little afraid we were going to be out of work. And it turned out that it doesn't look like the case, but we're much more thoughtful now about how we think about leadership. I also want to give a little plug. In 2014, Stanford University Press will publish her next book called Hard Times, Leadership in America. Please help me welcome Dr. Kellerman.
So I actually can speak as well as write, which is a good thing. Okay, so we've been set under strict time limits, so I'm going to try to talk fast and get in as much as I reasonably can. First thing to know about me, I'll give you a couple of facts about myself. One is, I've been a leadership person for many years. 2 is, I am every bit as much a followership person now as I am a leadership person. It escapes me entirely how you can do leadership without simultaneously giving equal weight to followership. So I'm here to change the world. I'm here to change the academy. And I'll talk at the very end about something that I call the leadership system. The second thing to know about me is that I'm not a how-to person. I'm going to leave it to my colleagues to talk about how to be a good follower, how to be a courageous follower, and so forth. I look at this entire field of leadership and followership from a socio-political perspective, and my comments in the next few moments will be along those lines. The third thing I'm going to do is give you a very brief history of how I, who had been for 2 decades or so, maybe not quite that much, a leadership person, all my early books, leadership, 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 became interested in followership very quickly. You mentioned that I have written a book. I wrote a book called Bad Leadership because I was furious that the field of leadership was fixated on how to become a good leader and paid no attention to what we know is a ubiquitous problem, which is bad leadership. So I wrote a book called Bad Leadership, and as I was writing the book, I realized one of the most sort of basic principles, which, however, had eluded me for a long time, which is you cannot have bad leadership or bad leaders without bad, thank you, you know, actually the day's over. We don't really have to teach them anything. They know it all. Exactly, and that's quite literally true. So my standard line on this, it's an extreme example, but it applies across the board. Of Hitler, Adolf Hitler, it is said he killed 6 million Jews. How many Jews did Adolf Hitler kill? 0. How can you understand the phenomenon of Nazi Germany? How can you understand the United States in the second decade of the 21st century without having a conception of the other? I'm going to spare you the semantics about the word follower, although we could spend a lot of time on that. When I wrote Bad Leadership, I vowed never again to discuss leadership without simultaneously discussing followership, and I have not. I did write a book subsequent. Let me say just a little bit about the word follower. So I teach a course at the Kennedy School called Followership. If I have the word leadership in a course and I have the word followership in a course, guess which course gets more students? Nobody wants to learn how to follow. Everybody wants to learn how to lead, with which I have a huge problem to begin. Not everybody can be a leader. All of us follow, and I was very glad to hear some of the comments already made this morning. In keeping with this, you are going to be a follower much more of your lives than you're going to be a leader. Follower doesn't mean a sheep. It means somebody with their own intelligence, their own insights, who can create change from wherever you are in the organization. So let me give you a tiny history lesson before I do anything else. Again, I'm going to be very, very quick. It was already suggested this morning that things have changed in the 21st century because of technology. It has already impacted relations between leaders and followers. But the other thing to know about leadership and followership in the 21st century is that it is, or they are, a natural outcome of an historical trajectory. So if you go from Plato and his philosopher king, Machiavelli the prince, then you get to John Locke. How many of you know John Locke a little? Yay. John Locke, suddenly there's conversation about sharing powers, divided government. Guess what? You can kick out a leader if you're a follower. Since the age of the Enlightenment, this has been the nature of the conversation. How do you divide power between the governors and the governed? And in the 19th century, you had abolitionism, you had women. I'm now talking only in the United States, although my comments are always tended to be global in general. You had people, again, pressures from the bottom up, coming from the bottom up. So this is, again, a historical trajectory. In the 20th century, in the middle of the 20th century, we had various rights revolutions, women's rights, civil rights, anti-war movement, gay and lesbian rights, animal rights, rights of the disadvantaged. That's all people, this is all a precursor to what you're experiencing in the 21st century. So let me give you a few little sort of code phrases on followership, and then I'll make my concluding statement. Number one, leader centrism, that is this fixation on the leader, is, in my view, antiquated. It is the old-fashioned way of looking at this field that you're all in, which is about change. Number two, followers have always been more important than we typically think they are. And number three, in the 21st century, for reasons of changing culture and changing technologies, followers are more important than they have ever historically been before. Number four, followers are important when they do something. They're equally important, counterintuitively, when they do nothing. So if you're running an organization where most of the people are paying no attention, that matters to the organization. It gives the leader, if you're not paying attention, you're checking out, you're not voting, the people who already have power are going to tend to maintain power. Finally, my final comments on this. There is a balance of power shift. Historically, in the 21st century, followers are getting stronger and leaders are getting weaker. I could go on about the weakening of leaders. I will spare you that. Finally, my closing comment. I now talk not only, and thank you for mentioning the forthcoming book, I now talk not about leadership, and I don't even talk about followership anymore. I talk about what I call the leadership system, and it has three, in my view, equally important parts. It's a system. Leaders are important. This is not to dismiss the importance of leaders, but is to get them to move over, to get us to move over in our thinking, and to get them to share center stage. You have the leaders, you have the followers, and finally you have the context. You cannot understand leadership and followership unless you get the setting within which you're situated. The immediate setting, which could be a small group or a team. In this case, we could talk about the academy. It matters that the academy is in the United States of America. It matters that we're having this conversation in the year 2014 as opposed to even 10 years ago. So leadership system, leaders, followers, and context. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kellerman. I'd like to introduce now Bob Kulhan. He's an adjunct professor for the Fuqua School of Business at Duke University, as well as Columbia Business School, Columbia University. He is president and CEO of Business Improvisations, which is located in Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York. Business Improv is a world-class leader in developing experiential learning programs for businesses. For 20 years, Bob has performed and taught improvisation internationally, and many of his clients are Fortune 500 companies. Go ahead and help me in welcoming Mr. Kulhan.
Hello, good morning. I am honored to be here, and thank you very much for everything that you do. It certainly means a lot to me and all my colleagues. As an improviser, we get the reputation of not preparing, and sure enough, here's my speech that I'm going to give you right there. 3 words, actually 6 words that I wrote right here at the table. And now that's not to say that we're not prepared. We do a lot of preparing. We do a lot of training. We work very, very hard the same way that anybody does. And the first thing that I wrote was inspired by the keynote before, and I was mulling it over, and I even spoke briefly with Bree, my wonderful guide, about this, or Brianna. And I wrote, "Follow the follower." Now, this is a big phrase in improvisation. It essentially means give up and just organically do what the group is doing. Now, as someone who actually goes into great universities and great businesses and works with people to create culture, to inspire, to motivate, to get people to think, this phrase began to mean something different to me today, which is exactly what was iterated before many times, which is the most enlightened leaders that I know actually pay very close attention to the people who they lead. They are inspired by the people who they lead. That's not dismissive of vision and guide and drive, tenacity, motivation. It's a level of awareness that has, I think, evolved certainly in the last 15 years or so with social media and the internet, frankly, and ways that we communicate with each other. It means focus on them. And they'll focus on you in return. We're all in people businesses. It's bonds. It's connection with people. And there's a basic human desire to be heard, to believe that somebody understands what we're saying. It's the thing that connects all great relationships, that somebody gets you, somebody understands you. And as a leader, if you can actually turn that around to the people that you lead, you have a great chance of discovering trends and moving forward. Mark Zuckerberg is mentioned over and over again. I'd venture to say, as much of a visionary, he's a student. He listens, and he adapts, and he evolves. The other thing I wrote, 3 more words, guns for hire. My company, which actually has a lot of people in it that I lead, actually has only 1 full-time employee. The rest are guns for hire. Now, who does the loyalty belong to for a gun for hire? I'm sorry? The hire, yeah. Yeah, that person. So the question that I'm asked quite often is, how do I engender loyalty for people who are loyal to themselves? And I think for me it's all cyclical. Now going back to follow the follower, that I care about them. I focus on them. I listen to them. I hear what they have to say. That doesn't mean I always take what they tell me. I, as the leader, have to choose what's good and bad and right and wrong and ugly and correct to make a single vision work. It means, though, that I respect them enough to pay attention to what they have to say, and in turn, they give me their loyalty and trust. In fact, they're running a job for me right now. So I have to trust that they're going to do this, because ultimately the brand is me and my company. And I think it's all a big circle, that if we're listening to each other and talking to each other, in turn, people will listen to us and talk with us, and that's how bonds are made.
Thank you very much. All right, we're going to turn to the other table here, and I'll start with Glenn Carle. Mr. Carle spent, oh, I'm sorry, I've got him reversed. I'm going to start with Mr. Shackelford, if I can. So, Kelly Shackelford is president and CEO of the Liberty Institute. He is a constitutional scholar who has argued before the U.S. Supreme Court, testified before the U.S. House and Senate on constitutional issues, and has won 3 state landmark First Amendment and religious liberty cases just in the past few years. He was recently named one of the 25 greatest Texas lawyers of the past quarter century by the publication Texas Lawyer. Mr. Shackelford is on the Board of Trustees of the United States Supreme Court Historical Society and is a graduate of Baylor University. Help me in welcoming Mr. Shackelford.
It's an honor to be here. Let me start out, because I think it's good for you to know a little bit about us, so that when you ask questions, you might could ask something even more pointed in our background. My background is the group I lead is a legal organization called Liberty Institute, and our mission is to defend and to restore religious freedom across America, and we do that free of charge. And I've been doing this for 25 years. And it was only in the last, really handful of years that we've seen a real uptick in what we've been having to do to actually serve the military. We've got cases all across the country right now where veterans' memorials are under attack to be torn down because they have a cross or a Star of David or something on them. And then that led us to relationships with a lot of military leaders, as well as all the heads of all the veterans organizations. We've represented the American Legion, the Military Order of the Purple Heart, the VFW, et cetera. And it led us into actually seeing that there were a number of problems beginning to occur, maybe from the PC community or whatever, that had seeped into the military, where people weren't allowed to live out their faith in a way that was actually very good for the military. So we've had to do those cases. So some of the things I'll bring up in our time might be situations that, what if you're the only one as a follower willing to do the right thing? And that's what we see in our cases a lot. And so I'll try to provide some of those examples. But before I do that, I thought, what are some basic principles so you'll know my presuppositions when it comes to leadership and followership? And I really think the 2 top with me are you have to start with character and integrity at the top. I mean, you heard it a little earlier, but it's so true. You're just not going to follow someone that you don't trust. And that same kind of character and integrity is necessary to be a good follower. I mean, if you're a good follower, that means that you're actually going to offer input and feedback to the leader when maybe there's a risk to it. Because you're putting your unit, or you're putting your team, or you're putting whatever mission that you're connected with above your own future, above what might happen to you. And so that same character that's necessary in a leader that you're willing to follow is necessary in you if you're going to be a good follower. Secondly, the other sort of characteristic, I think, and it's often lost, and I think even it's rarely talked about with leadership, is, and I would go with the, I don't know how many of you have read these business books, et cetera, but one of the very well-known business books is Good to Great by Jim Collins. And they study these companies and what's the difference between a good company and a great company. And one of the things that sort of threw people off was they thought that the really good leaders of the best companies would be the sort of charismatic, hard-charging kind of leader. And what they found out was that really wasn't the case. The very best were the leaders who had humility, who were lifting everybody else up around them, who were kind of just as comfortable being in the background, although it was necessary to be out front. And I mean, another way to put that really is, if you're going to be a good leader, you need to know that you don't have all the answers. And now, anybody with a brain should understand that, but some people can get pretty puffed up. And so that kind of humility, again, same kind of humility that's necessary with being a good follower. Again, are you putting yourself aside and is it more about the unit or the mission or whatever you're trying to accomplish? That's how you have incredibly powerful teams, incredibly powerful organizations, is when people are really putting themselves aside, using their gifts to the greatest, but being willing to step forward and do what they need to do to make the team better. That's how you get synergies that really, what is happening is better than the sum of the parts. And again, I could give a lot of examples of how could these people, they don't have any power, how could they change anything? I'll just leave you with one quick one because it's one of my favorite cases. A number of years ago, I opened my newspaper and I saw something I had never seen, which was senior citizens holding picket signs. And I thought, well, what's going on? Well, these seniors had been told in their senior center that they couldn't pray over their meals because it was a government building, and that they weren't allowed to sing gospel songs on their piano in the back. And one of them was a former minister, and they would study the Bible once a week at the table. And we had a young attorney who was fresh out of service in the military, and I put this paper down in front of him, and I said, hey, why don't we see if we can help these people? Before I could finish my statement, he's like peeling out of the parking lot in his car, going to the senior center. And they said, look, we're the has-beens, we're the nobodies, we don't have any power in this town. There's these 4 people on the city council, they control everything. But we just had to say something because this is not right, and we just had to speak up. So we never thought anybody would help us, much less lawyers for free. And so this young attorney comes back to me and he says, okay, this city doesn't deserve to be warned, they should be destroyed. And I said, no, that's not, as an organization, how we're going to do things. We're going to send a letter, it's going to say, hey, there's this thing, the Constitution, you really ought to read it, let's try to get this straightened out. And, the response we got from them was sue us. And so we said, okay, and so we sued them. And at the press conference, I had all the seniors lined up behind me, and at the end of the line was a senior, Barney, Barney had and I said something that I'm sure most media people would tell you never to do, which is at the end of the press conference, I said, do any of y'all want to say anything? Well, Barney walks up. Barney has a bolo tie, a cowboy hat, a western suit, his only suit, and cowboy boots. And he comes up to the microphone, and Barney says, I fought World War II for these freedoms, and I ain't going into the corner to pray. If they want to arrest me, fine, long as it says what it's arrested for praying. He turns around and walks in the back of the room. Well, an hour later, I get a call from Bill O'Reilly's producer saying, we want the guy in the hat. And Barney starts a whirlwind tour. He testifies in the U.S. Senate for the Subcommittee on the Constitution. He was quite a hit. And by the time it was over, we had not only won the case and got injunctions that they could never interfere with the seniors again, praying over their meals, they could never interfere with them singing songs. We even won a little money so they could hold a celebration party in the senior center. But my favorite part is what happened after the case was over. The powerless people had won by standing their ground. And what had happened is everybody in the city realized that the leaders they had weren't very good leaders and really, that they weren't as powerless as they thought. So they held a recall election, and they threw all 4 of the city council members out of the office. And about a year ago, I got a postcard from one of the seniors because she wanted me to know that she was now one of the city council members, new city council members. And so sometimes I think we think because we're not in the greatest position of authority or whatever that we can't cause change. And I'm not talking about revolting or whatever else, but I'm saying sometimes maybe there's only one person willing to do the right thing. But I see it over and over and over again in our work where entire communities are under stress or attack or pressure, and one person steps up. And when they do, the whole community changes. And so I think it's very important that all the way up the chain that people be obedient to the kind of character and standing for the right things, because that can change everything all the way up above.
Thank you very much, Kelly. And finally, I'd like to introduce Mr. Glenn Carle. Mr. Carle has spent 23 years in the clandestine service of the Central Intelligence Agency, where he worked in a number of overseas posts and on 4 continents. Mr. Carle's last position was as Deputy National Intelligence Officer for Transnational Threats on the National Intelligence Council. Mr. Carle has also served as a trade negotiator in the Executive Office of the President, and he is the author of a book that many of you may have heard of, The Interrogator, which portrays the U.S. counterterrorism efforts and interrogation. And it's been called one of the greatest nonfiction books about the CIA. So help me in welcoming Mr. Carle.
I was a CIA officer, and you'll be in the Navy or other services. There are a lot of you from other services. And so we're very similar in that we will be almost insignificantly noticeable teeny pieces in infinitely large institutions that seem impossible to change. And there's a lot of truth to that characterization. That's sort of the nature of everybody in Facebook or the Marine Corps or the Navy or the CIA. But maybe it needn't be that way, and as we just heard, and I think by all 3 of my predecessors, that leadership, if you take away anything, I think it's to cast away the reflexive image of the man on the white horse, and I will learn how to have the men follow or the women follow me, and realize that leadership is a process and a thumbnail reference to the culture of an institution and also as lived by each individual in it. At least that's what I hope is the case. Something that the moderator didn't mention is that another of my assignments, all of my assignments were sort of surprises, which is why one chooses the career to be sent and do strange things, was to work on and to be the sort of the person pushing the peanut along through the institution, creating the first leadership program for the Directorate of Operations, which are the spies overseas in the history of the CIA, because the CIA realized under George Tenet, prodded by oversight committees, one of the rare positive functions I've seen an oversight committee perform, that the CIA was awful at leadership, in particular the Directorate of Operations, and so do something about it. And that trickled down the bureaucracies to where my boss, who was the director of the moment, the Director of Human Resources, said, Glenn, you have volunteered to do the following thing, which was to come up with a leadership program. But I hadn't been a leadership expert like my colleagues here. I had lived my career. And I realized in the doing that that was the most relevant background one could possibly have, I think, if one is a thinking person. So as I was doing that, my boss came into the office and said, I volunteered me for another assignment, which was that which is not the subject of this forum really, but it's what brought me here, that he was volunteering me to lead the interrogation of one of what we believed was the top half-dozen officers in Al-Qaeda. I'm not allowed to say who it was, but a very, very senior person in Al-Qaeda. In 2002, not long after the 9/11 attacks, and we were convinced that he could lead us to bin Laden, and if he couldn't, at least could help us, enable us to destroy Al-Qaeda. And I was told then to do, quote, whatever it takes, do you understand, to get the man to talk. And I instantaneously like that, after this was 20 years into my career, was aware that this was the critical moment of my career, I think of my life, and I believed, and do believe, I thought so at the time, not in hindsight, a critical moment in the history of the CIA since its founding just after World War II. Because the issue is, what do you do as an officer? I was the equivalent of a lieutenant colonel, which I guess is a commander. And I had just been briefed that the President, the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, the Office of General Counsel of the White House, and Director of the CIA, et cetera, had all deliberated, authorized, and ordered me, to do the following. And I'm a lieutenant colonel. And to me, I responded by saying, well, what about the Convention Against Torture? What about the Geneva Conventions, which the United States wrote? What about the U.S. Constitution? And I was told that I was lieutenant colonel and whom I had to challenge legal orders. And I was either part of the team on the assignment or I wasn't. If you challenge something like this, and if you challenge much less dramatic orders or cultural aspects of your institution, you will be destroyed. There are always channels for grievance or to challenge or to protest or to raise wrongdoing. The CIA is as diligent as any other part of the government in providing these opportunities to protect officers and the system and the integrity of the system. But the fact is that even if you win that battle, you will almost always lose personally and probably be destroyed. That's just a fact. So what does one do? All of the rules of leadership that you will be studying, which are very important, are actually secondary to the issue that I had to face and that all of you will face at some point, if not every day, of your careers if you are perceptive enough to think about it. And that is, how does one follow in an honorable way and fulfill one's mission? And in following, how can one be a leader? The thing I learned from the leadership program in a conscious way that I worked on developing was that leadership it doesn't depend on an individual. It is the values that our first speaker alluded to, that the Marine Corps and all of the service academies teach so well. The military does very well at teaching leadership. The agency is doing better, but the whole point of being an officer in a uniformed service is to learn how to lead, which means you also have to learn how to follow and be part of an institution. What do you do? That's normally what works, but what do you do in the crisis moments? A famous golfer from 80 years ago said that character is what you do when no one is looking. And we've all heard some variation of that, and that's fundamentally the issue. For a case officer, again, the agency does a pretty good job of looking for officers or individuals to become officers who have the characteristics, the personality, the values that give the institution confidence, as much as one can have, that out of sight, since everything we do is out of sight of even our superiors and our peers, is what we say we did. So if I have $50,000 to pay to a source, and I come back and I say, yeah, I gave it to him as we were agreed I would do, I actually did that, and I'm not buying an island in the Caribbean, as Aldrich Ames, a CIA officer who was a spy for the Soviets, actually did. So what do you do in a moment like this when you cannot win, and if you do what you are ordered to do, which apparently is in line with everything you're told, really betrays your institution, yourself, and the values of your country? The regular rules and all of the precepts that you will hear about, the 14 points that the West Point uses and the Marine Corps uses and the Navy probably uses 14 or 15 points too, all are valid and all become irrelevant in that moment. So you're confronted as a lieutenant colonel with a chance either to be part of a corrupt system, frankly, or be destroyed, or maybe be both, and yet to try to do what you believe is your obligation to do the right thing. And how do you do that? I think there It's a process of thought and then action. It's a culture in an institution, in a society that can be inculcated from on high and has to be embraced every moment from below. I think the best change that the CIA made in attempting to get a handle on leadership it was modeled after the services again, and that is to make an officer's evaluation, annual evaluation, they'll have different names in different institutions, have as a critical component to be rated on how well this officer, how well did Glenn Carle mentor his subordinates and peers? How well did he help them succeed in their missions? That was leadership. It was not striking a pose and achieving something himself. Particularly relevant in the CIA, where we are all lone wolves and we do our jobs alone. How can you help your peers? Well, you can, but it's not a clear-cut thing. So what can you do? My father's proudest achievement in life, he would never admit it, but I knew him well. And I think his proudest achievement in life came early on. He was voted the Boston University class of 1943 class iconoclast. The day after he was voted that, he went into the Marine Corps. But I am my father's son, and I think this is a critical thing, and it makes me sound in an institution, certainly like the Navy or the CIA, potentially like, if not a subversive, more than an iconoclast, perhaps insubordinate, and I'm not. But what one must do is challenge everything always. It doesn't mean you don't follow orders and you aren't loyal and you aren't collegial, but you must never accept something because it's your order. If you do, you're mindless, and you will torture people, as I was ordered to do. Corollary of that is you must always doubt everything. This too can be subversive. Without guidelines and rules and accepted norms, how can anything hold together, and how can we have any direction? This is one of the, frankly for me, delicious contradictions that makes a life in the CIA rewarding. We live with contradictions all the time. How can we be loyal to our flag and honor the people and respect the people we are actually getting to subvert their deepest values? That's the contradiction in terms, and that's what we do. So if you doubt everything, you can actually have truer convictions and maybe see fault, and that's part of leadership too. And then what can you do when the system has done everything according to the rules and leads you to torture? The only thing you can do, because the laws were there, as I iterated, honorable men and women were in place trying to do their duty honorably, according to the spirit as well as the letter of the law. All of it failed. All of it failed. So we don't need more laws. You could argue we need better people, but the people I work with are men and women of integrity. The only thing you can do is shed light on the darkness, to sound almost biblical. If you talk openly, publicly, about what is wrong in your institution and in some instances, and I'm not defending Snowden, who's no fan of mine, I'm no fan of his, in public, that's the only defense a society and an institution and an individual have against an insidious corruption that I, frankly, experienced. And then finally, the single step that I was most proud of and that people would make jokes about when I was the National Intelligence Officer for Terrorism, which I did after the interrogation period, was that I would conclude every meeting I had by asking the following semi-flippant sounding question. I'd say, okay, we've just decided to do this or that. Now tell me where I am stupid. What have I done wrong? You must tell me what I am not seeing, what I'm perceiving incorrectly. That's your job as the subordinate. That's you leading. I cannot see everything. We all are blind. We all have assumptions. And then finally, I would say that there are no set rules to leadership. There are precepts, and you'll have these 14 points. Those are all valid. But what I'm talking about in the crisis points, when these rules no longer apply relevantly, it's a process, an approach to your responsibilities as an individual. It's not a set of rules, and they are moral, ethical, and functional. They're challenging and doubting and shedding the light and asking where you are stupid and what might be wrong and never accepting anything. And that's what makes an institution healthy. American services of all branches are very proud, and I think they're right, although I never served in the uniformed services, when they say, well, our services will succeed and have succeeded because our non-commissioned officers, the junior people, are empowered from day one, from when they take their oath, to take initiative. And the Soviet service was much more hierarchical. Yes, sir, the commissar knows, and if I challenge, I will be destroyed. And that will give us flexibility. That was the triumph of the German army. Their non-commissioned officers took initiative. That's why they were the best army in the world at the time. It's a similar point, I think, that I am making. And finally, it's all really about a paradigm of thought. And we cannot see what we can't see. We can't be aware of what's around the corner. But if we're consciously at least aware that we are blind, then we can see a little better and maybe avoid the errors of falling into an institution unthinkingly and being a follower and not a leader and a follower simultaneously. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Well, I hope that these excellent comments and introductory remarks have been triggering some thinking on your part, and now is the fun part of our panel. So I'm encouraging you to begin queuing at the two microphones. When you come up and offer a question, just make sure you state your name and let us know where you're from. And also, if you want to direct it to one of the panelists, that's terrific. If you'd like to just address it to the panel writ large, we'll just get them to interact on the topic. So why don't you kick us off, sir? You're ready to go.
Hello, my name is Nicholas Selby. My question is directed towards Mr. Carle. Thank you so much. Sir, you had the audience in the palm of your hand with your incredibly dramatic story, and you gave an amazing moral. What happened? What did you do?
I failed. No, I didn't. Well, that's the debatable point. I failed and think I succeeded simultaneously. Many people have asked a more pointed question, which is implied in yours too, is why didn't you just resign if you thought this was so wrong? Why didn't you walk away? And that's a fair question. And some colleagues refuse to be involved. That question is often asked about why did you serve in the CIA anyway? I mean, the whole institution does awful things, and so have you not corrupted yourself, by the initial choices you make? And I don't agree with the conclusions, to the implied conclusions to each question. All of us, our jobs, whatever we do, whether we're working at a 7-Eleven in the Navy or the CIA, the job is basically to solve a problem. If everything worked right, we wouldn't have anything to do. So in a general sense, the job is to try to get things right. More particularly for me, had I walked away, I could claim that I was pure, but I would have been passive and not stepped up to my responsibilities to try to get things right. So that was my job. That was my responsibility as a man, frankly, not just as an officer. And so I had, as I describe at some point in my book, and it's true for all of us at all times, I had, and I said this to my detainee, there was a circle within which I had responsibility and at least a measure of control. And I could do things, I could influence, if not decide, issues within that circle of control. Now, it got smaller and smaller as the pressure grew more and more intense. But I could try to influence things. I could say, the emperor has no clothes, sir. And everyone would say, well, you're crazy. No, look at that beautiful ermine coat. And cast me aside. And that's what happened. No one succeeded to stop what was happening. Nobody. But I tried. So although I failed, I succeeded. That's what I did.
Thank you.
All right. Go ahead. Ms. Shipman.
Speakers of the panel, my name is Tyler Heinemeier. I'm a midshipman at the Naval Academy. Mr. Glenn Carle, sorry, talked about earlier, we have to be able to step up in an institution where we're given an order that violates our core principles, our values, integrity, Constitution, whatever. So my question is for all of y'all, how in an organization can you not fall into groupthink? How can you step up and say, hey, this is wrong, what can you do?
Sure, I'll take first crack at this one. It comes from leadership, I think. The leaders have to create an environment, a culture in which pushback, in which honesty is not only accepted, it's treasured, it's valued. And if you create that culture correctly, I mean, even if it's Fridays, as was pointed out before with Zuckerberg, that he's like, give me the hard questions, tell me what I'm not doing right, or at the end as well, tell me where I'm missing it. Then you can get that in a very protected way. I think also it comes from the people, the subordinates, who, if you respect your superior officer, you might not call that person out. And when I say superior officer, I mean any leader. You might not call that person out in front of the entire group. You might say, can I have 5 minutes of your time, and squirrel away in a corner and say, I really feel this way, I'm passionate about this, and I'm telling you because I respect you, because I treasure our relationship, and I'm having problems reconciling this. And hopefully that will inspire, again, communication on both sides.
I'll give you 4 quick answers. One, I think that's great. If you have a leader who encourages this kind of feedback, how lovely, how sweet. In the real world, that's not typically the case. I'm not even, without naming names, some names came up this morning as sort of paragons of wonderfulness. I'm not sure everybody's such a paragon of wonderfulness. I tell my students when they ask exactly the same kind of question that you just asked, and as your story testifies, it can be risky. It can be personally risky, professionally risky, financially risky, you name it, risky across the board. There are certain strategies that subordinates can employ, gaining alliances, finding people who will work with them, and so forth and so on. But if you're going to speak up, it can be risky. So there's risk entailed. The second comment I'd make is about the word loyalty that came up this morning. You'll notice how differently it was used. It's a lovely word. We're all going, oh my God, great, let's all be loyal. This morning it came up in one way, like I got an order or I was asked to do something that I didn't particularly believe in, but the right thing to do was to follow the order or the request. Later this morning, it's come up in an extremely different way. So you're gonna have to think through what does loyalty mean to me? And this is very related to bad leadership. The question is, how do ordinary people deal with bad leadership? So my final answer is that there are subjects in this area of leadership studies. There are 2 subjects that the field doesn't look at, both of which would help us have a better sense of how to respond to the question that you raised. One is bad leadership. How do we stop it? How do we slow it? Why are we always teaching people how to be good leaders, and we never teach people the answers or the array of possible answers to the question that you raised, which is, okay, how do I stop or at least slow bad leadership? And the final thing I would say is that very much in keeping with what I just said, which is the more you start talking about these kinds of questions, and these are hard and interesting questions that are being raised in the context of leadership and followership and how am I in a group, the more you will come to understand and develop for yourselves responses to the questions, and the more we will compel leaders to be the kinds of leaders that you just described, which is that invite as opposed to reject the speaking up to which you alluded.
No matter what circumstance or environment you're in, I think, because let's assume it could be a very bad one, with a bad leader, with not an open, honest kind of atmosphere. Ultimately, it's going to come down to you, to each of us. And so how to prepare yourself for that is, what kind of character are you developing? And from my standpoint, for many people, that comes from their faith, which is why we're fighting so hard to make sure that that's not stripped away, which is being attempted in some ways within the military. Because many people come to those kinds of character building and reliance on doing what is right, no matter what the consequences, through their faith. And so for those who that's the way they need to be strong in their faith and what they're committed to, and for those who have other means, they need to be, it ultimately is going to come down to that individual doing the right thing in the crisis point when the structure isn't around to help you. It's just a matter of what kind of character and integrity do you have, and are you going to be true to that? And that takes consistent building of your character by what you're doing and not moving away 1 inch at a time and finding yourself very far from somebody you used to recognize. That means being true and not veering off the path and saying, you know, this is going to be a part of my discipline as well, not just my physical discipline, but my discipline regarding who I am and my character and what I will stand for and what my children will look up to someday.
Thank you. We take a couple more here. We had a long line here, so go ahead.
Good morning, panel. My name is Lillian Kramer. I'm also a midshipman, and I have a question for Dr. Kellerman. Dr. Kellerman, what is the most effective way for a leader to fully understand and acknowledge their followers' role in shaping or revitalizing an organization?
I'm going to give you an answer that I often resort to. So leadership is, the field of leadership is so damn, am I allowed to say damn in Annapolis? Uh-oh. It's so damn full of so many platitudes. It's so riddled with feel-good messages to people. You know, your question really can be answered in, you know, I could say, well, let's develop character, let's develop integrity, let's do all those things. The route that I take, and it's simply my way of getting into all of this stuff, is through knowing. If you teach any student of this subject, leadership, follow, whatever you want to call it, the kinds of things that we're talking about here today, if you have those conversations, just having the conversation, you don't have to do an experiential exercise. I'm not saying anything negative about experiential exercise. I'm just saying just the knowing the history of dominant patterns of dominance and deference, knowing how different the second decade of the 21st century is, even from the first decade of the 21st century, having some intelligence about the way the world really works as opposed to the way we wish it would work, that would go a long way toward helping leaders understand the impulse of the followers. So this kind of thing, just hearing it, and I just want to be realistic about this. I think, you know, I have spoken to, as all of us have, to a lot of different groups over the years, and I will ask questions. How many of you have never had a bad leader? And people laugh. Everybody, unless you're very young, has been exposed to teachers, bosses, community leaders, military, you name it, who are in some or another way bad. The definitions of the word bad really depend. So how you deal with that, it's easy for us to sit up here and say, well, you do this and you do that. I think it's really risky. It's risky if you don't have money. It's risky if you're just entering the professional workplace. So I think clarity, knowing, having an intellectual, cognitive understanding of what this whole thing looks like, being smart about it, to me, would be the very first step.
Thank you, ma'am.
Take a turn here.
My name is River Wu. I'm from Wake Forest University. There's a lot of talk about how leaders aren't born, they're created, and then how leadership is simultaneous with followership. But then there's also the fact that not everyone's a leader. So I was just wondering if you could speak more on success in the context of not everyone's a leader.
All of us?
Whatever you like.
Anybody? All right. All right, and you mentioned something about born versus developed. Is that part of your question? Some people are just not cut out for this?
If that's what you would like to speak about. I mean, I'm down for whatever.
Yeah, that's what I thought I was hearing.
I think there are multiple answers or there's no answer, and both parts of that sentence are simultaneously true. Meaning that there is some study that you'll know better than I suspect.
Oh, definitely.
Modesty is something I have learned, though. No, I'm just kidding.
We're all just kidding.
Yes, that's right. If I can remember where I was now, I'm easily disoriented. It's an interrogation technique. Yeah. I have lost my train of thought, actually.
Okay, I won't do it anymore. Okay, I got it. Okay.
Yes, no, I remember what I was going to say. I'm sorry, pardon me. There's some story, at least, if not a test, where they thought, okay, you know, early man, what developed alpha male behavior and why does this exist and so on. And so there's the apocryphal, I suppose, you know, cave, and there's a bear in there, or maybe there's something that we would want in there. And so the alpha male says, I will go in. And he goes in, and look at the coward, he's not going in. And so who gets the girl? Well, the alpha male goes in and gets killed by a wild bear, and the one who's more prudent gets the girl in this instance. Sometimes you need to be the alpha male and attack, and other times you need to be more thoughtful. So my answer is that all things are relevant for leadership, and different circumstances will call for different skills in different functions, and there's not one kind of leader or characteristics in one person that would make a leader.
I was going to help you out there and throw some stuff to you. I agree. You know, I think leadership is authentic to those people. So you learn all these great words and study and hopefully get mentored, find people who can help guide you on your path and at the same time bring it out. I think it's a combination of a lot of different things. For me, listening to you, there were a couple things that jumped out, which is hard work. It takes focus and time, tenacity to learn both sides of this and learn who you are as a leader. And that means as well giving yourself and the people around you permission to fail. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean fail without thought. It means time to fail and learn and grow and develop and evolve to figure out what your voice is and be willing to speak it either as a leader or a follower.
Could I follow up on something? I'm sorry to speak a second time, but Professor Kellerman said something. I think she and I were saying the same thing, and talked about having this kind of discussion and becoming cognizant of these issues is part of how one can shape one's perceptions in the future about how to be a leader. I think that is true. And I'm going to say something which I cannot prove is the case, and open to criticisms I'm quite aware of. However, one of the horrors of recent years was Abu Ghraib. And Abu Ghraib was a hideous failure in all sorts of ways. The CIA also tortured. It did. But that's not, we aren't talking about torture. But it was much more codified and, frankly, much milder. Why? I argue it's because, and maybe this is the snob in me, but I argue it's because there's a big difference in what you will get out of someone who's ordered to be creative and be aggressive, who barely has a high school education, has never had to think about anything. And that was the case with the people doing the terrible things in Abu Ghraib, and people who have multiple degrees who are told, given the same orders. And what the CIA did break the law, but it was dramatically less hideous than what happened at Abu Ghraib. And I have always thought the reason why is because the people asked to do this brought dramatically different backgrounds. They had done a lot of talking and thinking. So in the order of horrors, the shedding the light played a role.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
My name is Graham Starr. I'm from Tufts University. And this is for, I guess, everyone on the board, on the panel. Mr. Kaplan mentioned this before, Silicon Valley has a lot of the founders' personality attracted to different organizations. We've been talking a lot about leaders and followers and how to lead and be a leader. How do we, talking about the organization now, how do we become something productive? How do we produce and be an efficient part of an organization without getting caught up in this personality of it all? If we're talking about leadership, there is a personality attached to it, and how do we create a sustainable organization as leaders without being caught up in being a leader?
I'll start with that. So one of the great things about the field of leadership is you often have to hold two contradictory ideas in your head at exactly the same moment. So I'm going to give you two contradictory ideas. One is, I do believe that there's something about the leader that is sort of hardwired, where we're forever hardwired to talk about the leader. We think the leader's horrible, and we talk about how horrible the leader is. We think the leader's inspirational and amazing. We talk about how great the leader is. So I'm not sure we can ever fight that, but I think the culture itself could counter the kind of I consider skewed approach, especially when the lead, you know, Zuckerberg is one of the very few people that everybody in the country knows as a sort of legendary leader, so forth and so on. But it's almost a more interesting question when the leader's perfectly fine, but not in that sort of amazing, heroic leadership mold. It seems to me that, you know, one of the things that can be done is to have broader conversations, to give people a sense. So I'll just talk about Harvard for 1 minute. If you look at the Harvard mission statements of the undergraduate institution, of the Kennedy School, of the business school, of the ed school, of the divinity school, of the medical school, I could go on. Every one of those mission statements has the word leadership in the mission statement. So the law school, for example, doesn't say our mission is to train great attorneys, we're to make educated cadre of lawyers. Our mission, it says, is to train lawyers who are leaders. And in medicine, the same thing. I'm going, I don't need my doctor to be a leader. I need my doctor to be a great doctor. So what the hell is this? So there's a fixation out there on the leader and on leadership. By the way, there's an article, a very short little article in Atlantic this month about just this issue. Why are we teaching everybody to be leaders? What is that all about? Why are we ennobling leadership like that? So while I do think there's some hard wiring going on, I think the culture, this is, by the way, quite new. It's about 10, 20, 30, 40 years old. Didn't used to be like this. We used to talk about civics. Now we're talking about leadership. Somehow it's become this incredible, sexy mantra, and it's very hard to change it now. But to the degree that it gets to be a much more subtle and sophisticated idea, I think it will at least help.
Yeah, I think that the best thing that any individual can do in an organization is to be fully who they are. I think we're all wired very differently. I think that really good organizations take advantage of the different and unique talents that each person offers, and to sort of, you know, fall into the mold of whoever the leader is, I think any good leader wouldn't want that to happen. They want you, they want me, they want us because we offer something that they don't necessarily have. And so I think by being, you know, and living out with the full talents and gifts that we have, you know, that's the best of all worlds. So that requires, I mean, what we're talking about, being a good follower, requires speaking up, offering those unique insights, you know, being different, being willing to be different. I'll tell you one of the things I learned that, you know, I guess I feel kind of dumb for not realizing it beforehand, but I had somebody who, on our team, who is a very bright individual, but is like a bull in a china shop, created problems all around them. Not good people. I mean, I think when they're in the military, they were listed personality profile as they would make a good sniper, but don't put them with people otherwise. And this is a person who, you know, yet was brilliant. And you know, I was told by a number of people, you should fire this person, you should fire this person. And for whatever reason, I didn't. You know, I wanted to help the person. And they've been a tremendous asset to us. And I was reading a book a few years ago. You might have seen the biography, the wonderful biography about Einstein, Albert Einstein. And it just clicked for the first time as I was reading Einstein. The reason Einstein was so incredible with the things he uncovered and discovered, and the reason why he was so creative, is because he was anti-authority somewhere in his, you know, he was an iconoclast, right? And so somebody, if you want somebody who's very creative, that thinks outside the box, it's because they kind of reject authority a lot, and they don't just accept it. And so with that, you're going to have to realize that, you know, they need to learn how to play well with others to some extent, but you've got to realize that that's the other part of having these unique and different parts of your team. So there's a requirement for the follower to be who they are, and there's also a requirement for the leader to understand that difference is good as long as you sort of take advantage of that for the mission or the organization.
All right.
Thank you.
Why don't we switch to this side? Go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Michael Downing. I go to Christopher Newport University in Newport News, Virginia. Of course, we're talking about followers here, and in the academic studies, I've read your book, Professor Kellerman. It's a great book, by the way. And
I'll pay you later.
And I hear all about, how you're supposed to support your followers, which is important in both the civilian world and the military world. You're supposed to have your followers have some kind of power. But what I have not been taught, and all I can say about this is what my father and grandfather and my family have talked to me about, is being careful not to placate the followers so much that productivity is just erased. So how do you avoid being so dormant with your followers and allowing them to get to a position where they're so comfortable that they don't do anything?
Good question. Yeah.
Deadlines. Hold people accountable. I mean, this is part of my world, really. It's give people homework assignments, go run with it, what's happening, talk to them, communicate with them, why is it working, why is it not working, what are we doing together, and then ultimately there has to be a level of accountability. I think that freedom, though, creates a lot of ownership, and from that ownership comes passion toward projects and things of that nature that creates that extra level of quality, frankly.
Can I just give a very quick answer? I use the word "it depends" when I get asked questions more often than I should, and people hate it because I don't give an answer. I just say it depends. The answer to your question, it depends. There is, everybody says, how do I do this, how do I do that? The basic answer is, it depends. What does it depend on? It depends on the situation. I keep using the word context. Okay, so if I'm in Facebook, there's one answer. If I'm leading a small religious organization in a conservative part of the South, there's another kind of answer. I'm not saying they're at opposite poles. I'm saying depends on those three parts of the system. It's a very good question. You can't, if you're a leader and you're trying to constantly make followers happy, the work does need to get done. And how do you find that line? But the answer is it depends. It depends on the situation, depends on who's the leader, who are the followers, and what is the task at hand. So you can come up with some kind of overarching whatever, but damn it, it depends. Sorry. But it's always correct. It's really the right answer. And anybody who gives you these neatly packaged, well, these are the character traits. I just reviewed, in fact, I endorsed a book that came up with 12 great character traits. One of them was being visionary and another was expert. Look, there are leadership situations where being a visionary is like, I don't need a visionary. I don't care if the person's a visionary. There are other leadership situations where empathy is not high on the list, but expertise really is high on the list. So, depends. Sorry.
Thank you. Anyone else want to tackle that? Or are you good? All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Switch over here.
Good morning, panel. I'm Regis Spigness, midshipman from the Citadel, and we've been talking a lot about getting rid of the bad leadership or what makes a organization have good leadership. But I want to know what your thoughts are on how we can work with that transition. If you got rid of the bad leadership and the followers that are still there are so used to following that bad leadership, what do you do to help them transition to working with the good leadership and becoming good followers as well?
So the transition question, when you're a leader following somebody else.
Yeah, I'm going to give you, I think it's an incredibly interesting question, and I'm going to give you now a kind of a big answer. Your question is so interesting, not on a sort of small group organizational level where the question still pertains. But if you look around the world, brief reference was made this morning to the Arab Spring. You could as well talk about the fall of the wall, that is the collapse of the Soviet Union. If you have followers who have known, let's say, people in a particular country or organization, who have known nothing but bad leadership, whether it's the Soviet Union, whether it is Syria, whether it is Egypt, that's all they've known for most of their lives. You cannot, as we are witnessing in Russia, as we are witnessing in the Middle East, You cannot, it's not enough to get rid of Mubarak. It's exactly what your question is implying. You need to replace that with something, but how do you replace it with something when, again, as your question says, the followers have not in any way been trained, socialized, or educated to govern themselves? It's a tough one, and it takes a long time, and the answer applies across the board. I'm giving you this global answer because we see it all over the world. There are many more democracies now than there used to be, even 25 years ago, and there are people struggling all over the world. In Asia, it's happening in China, it's happening in Thailand, it's happening all over the world where you have people who have had nothing but bad leadership. The bad leadership is either pushed out or turned over for other kinds of leadership, sometimes also bad. But the followers can't simply, from one minute to the next, know how properly to govern themselves. And it's a real problem, important one that you point to.
Yeah, I'd add to that. It's no organization or its culture or society and its culture are ever static, and they're never easy to change. So let's take the last 13 years now of U.S. history and how we have changed for the worse in a number of ways because of what we've done to ourselves, and yet how it can change back. If you ask, this is the peroration of one of my normal talks, but I think it's directly relevant to leadership because we're talking really about culture as it's perceived and lived, assumed by an individual in an institution and as a member of society and the society itself. If you asked, when you poll Americans who are 35 and above, should CIA officers be allowed to torture to protect us? A strong majority say, absolutely not. That's un-American. These guys exist to protect us from that sort of thing. When you poll, these are actual polls. When you poll Americans 35 and below, and you ask the same question, a majority of them say, guys like Carle, they got to do what they got to do. It's okay. Well, it's not okay, but they think it is. And why? Because for the last 13 years, two things in particular have happened. One, our leaders have said there's a bad guy behind every bush. The bush is burning. We have to protect ourselves. We must have strong men take strong actions. And if you're a dentist in Peoria who's a good citizen, you have your career, you have your family, you'll have the 7 minutes per day, statistically, which one has quality time with one's spouse. And then you think, God, I need to know what's going on in the world. And you'll read the paper, or you'll look at Facebook, or whatever it is that you do for probably 4 minutes, during which you might hear one of your leaders say, there's a bad guy behind every bush. And you go, well, they should know. They're sworn to do this. That's why they're there. It shapes your thoughts. That's one thing that's happened. And the 9/11, of course, is the reason that this has happened. The second thing that happened is particularly the television program 24 and all things like that. And I loathe that program. I will not watch it because what it says is that torture works, and you got to be tough. You have to be hard. That's how you're tough. And you have to do whatever it is. To the point where the commandant of West Point traveled to Hollywood to meet with producers there. This is true. And he said, the reason he went was to say the following: please stop making these programs. Even my cadets, when we teach them in ethics and leadership courses that torture doesn't work, that it is legal, that it is un-American, that you don't need to do this, all of these things, they say, yeah, that's what we're teaching, but we know how it is. And how do they know how it is? From the general culture. That's a change. Now, it can change back just as it changed. It's never static, and it's always hard to change. So to change an institution, it's also really difficult. But you can do it, and it's not by cutting off the heads of a leader or two that you might need to. It's by having fora in which one discusses things one needs to think about, and having ethics and leadership classes, and holding people accountable at their promotion panels for different kinds of behavior. That's the only thing you can do, I think.
Should we switch to this side?
Hello, my name is Lieutenant Colonel Dan Smith. I teach leadership and organizational psychology at West Point. I appreciate all your comments, especially the fact that you highlight to the delegates that the courage to speak truth to power doesn't come easily, that it can be costly. In my experience, I see that younger officers seem to have that courage more in greater in greater amounts than perhaps what you would think would be the opposite, that as you grow in maturity, as you grow in a position of power, it seems to me oftentimes that the ability to speak truth to power atrophies to some extent. So I wanted to give you the chance to talk about that dynamic and why you think it exists.
Very, very quickly. There are big generational differences. This is one of the few things in the field of leadership that's actually been properly researched. People in different ages have different attitudes. My guess is that the cohort, the demographic cohort that you're talking about, the younger officers, I don't think they're going to be more quiescent as they get older. The younger generation, again, this has to do with changes in culture and changes in technology. They're not like their elders. They are more used to, for various reasons that a little bit we've touched on, they're more used to saying their piece. And my guess is, and I think the military, it is adjusting, and sir, you all know this way better than I, but the military is adjusting. Nobody is immune. No group or organization virtually on the planet, save maybe North Korea, is immune to the kinds of trends that we're talking about.
I don't think it's generational.
There's a lot.
The baby boomer generation was more rebellious of authority of any other generation. They grew up, had the same sort of dynamic. I see in my cohort of officers, young leaders who really had the strength to speak truth to power. And at a certain point in our careers, now many of them, to use my grandmother's phrase in a different word, wouldn't say poop if they had a mouthful. That's the sort of, I don't think it's so much of it as a, I see it in every generation. It's not a cohort kind of thing. It seems to be something that happens over time as the stakes go up. The stakes to oneself and the stakes that are going to be decided, like what will my nation do in this situation? And I actually can impact that in a different way. I'll let you re-engage.
If I can just say one more sentence, there are completely generational differences. If you're not noticing them in the military, then it may be about the military per se. But there are, as I said, it's one of the few things that's out there that is scientifically demonstrated.
I do think there's, obviously, as you build a family, you get used to what you're being provided. There's a subtle sort of pulling you in and making you, you feel like more is at risk. I mean, we've seen that with, we have a case right now, for instance, with a guy who, now you'll say, well, of course, this is the Air Force. But this is a master sergeant who, 19 and a half years, served in Iraq. I mean, tells stories of having to clean the blood of his buddies off his boots. Served very honorably, and then had a new commander who was a lesbian woman who insisted that he affirm and agree with her belief on gay marriage. And his approach was essentially, look, we're all about the mission of the Air Force. This is not about, that we no matter what our beliefs are. But she insisted that he affirm that, and when he wouldn't, he was relieved of his duties. And so he wondered, what is he going to do? At 20 years, his pension vests. And so he was just not sure whether he was going to be willing to stand up because there was so much at risk. Just turned out a few days later, he was having a Bible study with his boys, unconnected to all this, and in the middle of that, it just came up naturally. He said, sons, you got to be willing to stand up for your faith. And when he said it, it just pierced his heart. And he realized, what am I doing? And he called us and he said, I've got to proceed forward. And so he filed a complaint. But as was mentioned, there are risks. I mean, the first thing that happened is they read him his Miranda rights and opened a criminal investigation against him, which is ridiculous. But the point is, as you grow in life and you're looking at that pension, you're looking at your family, certainly those things can build up and make it less likely that you can have the kind of independence to maybe speak out and dissent. So I do think there's some of those kind of things in life. But boy, we're really dependent upon folks like you to do that, or else we're going to lose who we are as a country. So I think it's important that we stay with doing what's right, standing up, speaking out, all the way through, but thinking about as you go through that am I getting sort of lulled into a position that maybe I wouldn't have when I was younger. I think that certainly is a natural thing that you can lull yourself into and make you less likely to do what you would do when you were younger and maybe more close to the training you got at places like this.
Yes, I completely agree, and I'm going to throw one more thing to the wall, which is training. When I came here, when I knew I was coming here, I spoke with a lot of people with whom I've had the extreme fortune of working and then befriending, including Colonel Joe LaBeouf at the Fuqua School of Business. And some of the things that they were stressing upon me and the commonalities of the overlap is the training over time. That if you put a child in a backyard and say play, they're going to pick up sticks and make guns and swords, and then over time, that's not appropriate. Don't do that here, don't do that at church, don't do it at school, and so over time, we get taught that there's a right place and a right time to do things. And then, sure enough, as we continue to rise through any organization, you watch a leader slap somebody's hand for, metaphorically, hopefully, for saying something or doing something that's not completely in line with that leader, and then all of a sudden, everybody around them learns that we shouldn't do this. So there becomes a little bit more, the phrase I wrote down is learned helplessness, which is a big study, that we get taught over time that we can't do things. When in truth, if we tweak our framing, even in any structure, we can focus on what we can do. And then in doing so, we can train others that it's okay when the timing is right, and I'll stress that word timing, to do things. Because sure enough, over time, our priorities change. And when we go through the organization, we are taught how to behave. And as leaders, we can teach people how to behave as well.
Excellent. Thanks. Why don't we go here?
Good morning. My name is Shivani Parikh. I'm from Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland. My question's for Mr. Kulhan. So in your experience working with corporations and managerial improvisation, what is the most effective approach that a leader can take in fostering an environment in which followers are free to innovate, dissent, reshape, have a voice?
First, try. Actually make the attempt to do it, put thought behind it, get buy-in, find one or two people around you that you can, all right, you're my Confederate, let's go in here and do it together. So now it's not one person trying to create a grassroots movement. It's a couple of people who are just trying to work. Also, what's the best way to eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So many people get intimidated at this overall, I want to change the entire structure of the entire organization. One bite at a time. What's one small thing that you can do for yourself? What's one thing that you can do with somebody else? And let that evolve. Always keeping your ear to the ground and your eyes open and learn, learn, learn. It comes from the willingness to try.
Thank you.
All right, switch over here. We've got about 5 minutes, I think.
Good morning. My name is Megan Downing. I'm from Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia. I'd like to address my question to Dr. Kellerman. I wanted to ask you, sometimes in society we have individuals who so impetuously attempt to make distinctions, well, unfair distinctions between male and female leadership. And
you've noticed. Oh. Okay.
Indeed. But I wanted to ask you, whereas a man may be labeled as ambitious, a woman in the same position doing the same thing can sometimes be labeled as overzealous, too bossy, etc. So at my university, in my leadership courses, we hear so many lectures and read texts about breaking the glass ceiling. But I just wanted to ask you, as an expert, how do you see female leaders, both as leaders and followers, breaking this glass ceiling, dealing with these challenges, but also being creative individuals, demonstrating their innovative capabilities while not being perceived as these overzealous characters?
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad the gender question came up once. Thank you. It is important. Women have done very well. Let's just talk about the United States for a moment. Women have done very well in this country, but they've actually done pretty miserably with regard to leadership roles. The numbers, if you ever looked at them across the board, whether it's CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, women as members of Congress, the numbers are still appallingly low. So what's the problem? The problem is more complex than we can begin to go into here. It's multifaceted. It's not just about leaning in. It's not just about work-life, family balance issues. It's not just about a patriarchal society. It's some amalgam of the two. or of the three. The main thing that I would say to you is I do think that women are saddled, the issues that you raised about it, this exact same characteristic in a female is perceived differently as it would be in a male. That appears to be quite real. Women are expected to be communal and collaborative and team, and men are, it's okay if they're more typically agentic. That is probably lessening somewhat over time, but it still holds. I have written about what I call an androgynous, for women, an androgynous style of leadership, which I think is probably the best answer, which is something that is neither too typically feminine or too typically masculine, but to be aware of this. I think you're raising something that's real, not imagined, and women, I think, do need, who want to be leaders and want to get ahead, do need to take it into account. I'm talking now only about style. And I think some middle ground, likely, in general, has proven the most successful. This is a very short answer to a rich and complicated question, but sorry.
Thank you.
And let me check in. About a minute? Do we have time for one more? Okay. So one more. So I think I'm going to have to make you our grand finale. Go ahead.
My name's Nick Holloway. I'm a student at Verta Park High School. This is a question for the entire panel. So we've talked about being a good leader and leading with our followers, but my question is, how would a fellow leader or a follower to someone who leads as commanding over, saying, this is my position, you should listen to me because I hold the authority, how could we deal with that in a proper manner without destroying the system, without bringing down the organization?
Yeah, I mean, it's what I said when I said this is risky business. You know, you made the point, Glenn, that you decided not to resign, that, you know, an option is to quit. An option is, for many people, is to leave the organization because they can't stand it. They can't continue to compromise themselves. I respect that decision. I get what you're saying totally, but I think for some people, for various reasons we don't have time to go into, I think many times in real life, as opposed to the fantasy life that people imagine, people have no choice, or they perceive they have no choice but to go along, even if the order or the request or the suggestion is bad. Now, torture may be a line you wouldn't want to cross, but I think in real life there are constantly day-to-day situations, sometimes 50 times a day, where you're doing something like, I don't want to be doing this, this is stupid, and you're going to go along. And people need to make, that's why, again, it depends. You need to make your own independent decisions when rebelling or revolting or dissenting makes no sense whatsoever. It's just stupid, and you need to go along, versus the times in life when you are really called to stand up and be counted.
For me, humility helps a lot as well. A little tangent off of this one, whether you're leading from on high or leading from within, if you're passionate, you're going to end up stepping on somebody's toes sometimes. And if that person's important to you, then it might be important to turn around once it's done and recognize your failure and communicate with that individual and learn, so hopefully you don't repeat it again. Ultimately, though, you know, we're people and we end up bumping into each other sometimes. And if the environment's done, if created respectfully, then you can continue to learn and figure it out as you evolve.
Yeah, obviously, I mean, you don't know you're always going to have this situation because it depends on who your leader is. But assuming you don't have a really extreme situation, then if you've decided to stay in that situation, then the only thing you can do is it's all about your manner of how you communicate. And that really comes down to your own humility and how you do that. Again, maybe you have a leader that's so horrific that even done properly with great humility, you still suffer the consequences, and that happens. But again, you know, the manner can be very different. There's obviously a very different thing from opposing and sort of almost looking like you're subverting authority, and doing so in a way where you actually care about your leader and you care about your team and because of that, you want to offer something. And again, it's their decision, but you've done everything you could to serve the team and to serve your leader, to be a good follower.
All right. Well, let me ask you to join me in thanking our panelists altogether. I think we have just a few final comments from the organizers here. So, go ahead.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Naval Academy and the Leadership Conference staff, we would like to present each of you with a gift as a token of our appreciation. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give them one more round of applause as we're passing these gifts, please.